그럼 지금부터 글로벌 인재 포럼 2015 기조연설을 시작하겠습니다. 아마 많은 분들이 기조연설 기다리고 계셨을 텐데요. 올해 기조연설은 고촉통 전 싱가포르 총리님, 그리고 오연천 울산대 총장님의 대담, 그리고 제프리 페퍼 미국 스탠퍼드대 석좌 교수님의 강연으로 진행이 되겠습니다. 자, 그럼 첫 번째 기조 연설자로 고촉통 전 싱가포르 총리님, 그리고 오연천 울산대 총장님을 무대로 모시겠습니다. 여러분 박수로 환영해 주시길 바랍니다. 네, 첫 번째 기조 연설은 변화하는 사회, 변화하는 교육이라는 주제로 강연을 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 단상으로 모시겠습니다. 여러분 다시 한번 큰 박수 부탁드립니다.
Prime Minister Ko will carry out the successful history of Singaporean higher education so far for the past 5 decades. And then he's trying to raise the serious questions for the future facing the global world. So now you are ready to deliver your speech. Why don't you welcome his speech for this morning, please.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, if you see me closing my eyes and falling asleep while standing, please do not feel alarmed. I just arrived at my hotel at 3 a.m. this morning. And I got up early, and here I am trying to deliver a keynote address. I came from Beijing on a back-to-back forum. I was there for the Understanding China Forum. And before that, I was in Guangzhou for the Maritime Silk Road Forum. So this is my third back-to-back forum. And I'll be flying back more or less immediately after this to Singapore. But thank you very much for inviting me to speak at a forum. Let me explain briefly why I accepted to do so. I'm not an educationist, nor an expert in education. I never taught in my life, other than for a 2-month stint as a relief teacher when I was a young man. I was born in the British colony of Singapore and went to an English stream school studying English history, geography, and literature. So I knew more about the British Empire than my neighbors, Indonesia or Malaysia. I sang God Save the King, which was the national anthem then for Singapore. And after the king died, God Save the Queen. Midway through my university in 1963, my country, which then was self-governing, joined the newly independent country of Malaya to form Malaysia. 2 years later, Singapore separated from Malaysia to become the independent Republic of Singapore. Singapore then had a third world education system. It was hard for many to have even a basic education. Today, its education system is first world. In the recent ranking based on maths and science standard scores by the OECD, Singapore ranked first in the world. Korea did well too, ranking third after Hong Kong. 3 East Asian countries, Singapore, Hong Kong, Korea. The university which I attended, now known as the National University of Singapore, is ranked 12th in the world by the QS World Ranking or World University Rankings. Having lived through the British colonial period and seen and participated in the transformation of newly independent Singapore from a poor third world country to a prosperous first world nation, I am familiar with the major changes in our education system. I keenly understand the interactive relationships between changes in society and education. As I thought when I was invited that I should accept, because Singapore might have something to offer in your discussion on changing society, changing education, as a sub-theme of your larger theme of a global human resource development, diverse talents, and changing societies. The Singapore government has always understood the importance of linking education to the needs of our society and economy. Education both shapes our society and economy and is in turn shaped by them. The type and quality of education will affect the tenor of our society and the quality of the economy. In turn, the size of the economy and the state of the budget will decide how much we could invest in education. From the very beginning, we needed to set ourselves on a virtuous cycle of education and economic development. With Singapore's only natural resource being its people, we tried to maximize their potential and get them to contribute to building the economy and the country. For today's talk, I will focus on the major shifts in our education system since the 1950s. I will not go into the details of education policies. Instead, I will focus on the strategic reasons for these shifts. I will also talk about the philosophy and key principles of our education system. I will conclude by sharing some thoughts on the future challenges and how we are preparing our young for tomorrow's world. Before I continue, let me put you in the context of Singapore. Geographically, Singapore is a little red dot. Or as former Prime Minister Habibie of Indonesia infamously coined the term to describe Singapore, little red dot. It is about 720 square kilometers, only slightly bigger than Seoul. Our original size was even smaller, 580 square kilometers. Over the years, we have expanded our country by quite a few percentage points, peacefully though, through land reclamation from the sea. We were an immigrant society under British colonial rule. The Malays came from Malaya, the Indians from India, and Chinese from China. When we attained the self-government in 1959, 50% of our population could not read and write. They were not literate. Those who went to English medium schools, like myself, formed only 50% of the entire population. The education system under the British colonial masters was fragmented and segregated. The Chinese had schools set up by the clan associations. The Indians had their own Tamil language schools, and the Malays their own too. There were also mission schools set up by the churches and madrasas by the Muslims. The schools all taught in their own language, their own curriculum, and there was no standardization. So when the People's Action Party, that is the PAP, took over self-government in 1959, education was top on its agenda. At that point, Singapore had a high unemployment rate of more than 10%, and our population was growing rapidly, 3.3% a year. The public maternity hospital in Singapore held the world record for the most number of babies born in a hospital in 1966. It delivered almost 40,000 babies and was crowned by the local media as the biggest baby factory in the world. The social goal of the government was education for all. Education for all. The government knew the importance of education in developing human resources. Education would provide opportunities for all, whether it was for the child of a rich businessman or a poor laborer, and level the playing field. It was the key towards climbing up the economic ladder for the country. We built schools at a frantic pace, one a month, to educate our post-war baby boomers. Even then, we had to have 2 school lessons a day, or 2 school sessions a day. We also doubled our teaching force in 10 years. Again, we needed to resort to extreme measures to meet our needs. Many teachers went for training in the morning and taught in the afternoon. As we grew our educational resources, the government began to grapple with the development of a national and social identity. As a nation of migrants, there was not yet a common Singaporean identity. We were just so many different ethnic groups, living harmoniously, but in different communal enclaves. We had 4 official languages: Malay, Chinese, Tamil, and English, which was a non-native language. Today, these 4 languages still remain our official languages. A major thrust of this shift towards greater national identity was the policy of bilingualism. For Singapore to be competitive in attracting foreign investment and jobs, English was chosen as the working language. It was readily accepted by all ethnic groups because, paradoxically, it was not our mother tongue. Had we chosen, say, Malay as the working language, the Chinese would be unhappy. So would the Tamils. And if you had chosen Chinese as our main language, and Chinese is spoken by the majority of the people, then the minority communities, the Malays and Tamils, would be very unhappy. So it's a paradox. English became our working language, which of course gave us a tremendous competitive advantage in today's world. But beyond the value of English as a working language, it also was a unifying language for Singaporeans, one that everyone, regardless of race, used to communicate and work. At the same time, it was important for Singaporeans not to lose their own unique ethnic languages and cultural identities. Then Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew said, if we were monolingual in our mother tongues, we will not make a living. Becoming monolingual in English would have been a setback. We would have lost our cultural identity. That quiet confidence about ourselves and our place in the world. But bilingualism was a difficult policy to implement because Chinese was not an easy subject to learn. With English as a working language, many Chinese Singaporeans did not feel the need to learn their mother tongue. At the same time, Chinese-educated teachers and scholars felt great angst at the lowering of standards in Chinese in schools. So we went through a lot of headaches and heartaches. Today, our bilingualism policy has reached an acceptable balance, and younger Singaporeans have become more proficient in English and their own mother tongues. Chinese would have to learn Chinese, Malay, Indians, Tamil as a second language. Beyond bilingualism, we also reinforce national cohesion through common syllabuses and school experiences, where our children learn and play together in a multiracial and multicultural environment. Ceremonial activities such as daily flag raising and lowering, the singing of national anthem, and recitation of the national pledge were also introduced to foster our national identity. You may know that this year is our 50th anniversary as an independent country, and we celebrated it in a big way to mark SG 50, a special year for us. The twin aims of education for all and developing a national identity were our main focus for the first 2 decades. While the majority of Singaporeans, of children, were enrolled in the English stream schools, the rapid growth had its costs. Dropout rates were high, and literacy remained low. Dr. Goh Keng Swee, Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew's right-hand man, was then the Minister for Defense. He saw firsthand the poor output and failure of our education system. Young Chinese men enlisted for national service could not understand instructions in English or even in Mandarin. They could only speak their own Chinese dialects. Dr. Goh was then sent to the Ministry of Education to put things right. He was a trained economist from the London School of Economics. He turned his economist's eye towards reforming education. He identified wastage in the system that led to high levels of school dropouts. He recommended several changes to the system, including restructuring the curriculum and a bilingual policy. The most important of these changes was the introduction of streaming in schools. He recognized that different children had different ability levels and did not grow academically at the same pace. But the school system, which we had then, catered for the mean in the student population, that is, the average student. As a result, the better students were slowed down, while the poorer students could not keep up with the classes. To cater for students with different academic abilities and to reduce dropout rates, they were streamed into different tracks based on their aptitude. To Dr. Goh, streaming was about efficiency and maximizing the potential of each student. Streaming was not universally accepted. Some educators thought that it demoralized the students who were put in the slower streams. Others felt that streaming was introduced too early in a child's life and disadvantaged the late bloomers. But the streaming was basically sound, and over the years it was refined. For example, students were streamed a year later, and there were provisions for restreaming. The Ministry of Education subsequently introduced subject-based banding in place of streaming, where students could take subjects with a mix of difficulty levels, rather than being streamed based on their overall abilities. The effectiveness of streaming was unquestionable. The dropout rate at the primary school level fell from 6% in the late 1970s to just 0.5% in 1997. At the secondary school level, it fell from 13% to 3.3%. In 2003, we introduced compulsory education. By 1990, Singapore's GDP per capita was 12,700 US dollars, up from 500 US dollars in 1965 when we became independent. Our economy had moved from being heavily dependent on entrepôt trade to a manufacturing economy. Our school system was progressing well and in tune with the country's industrialization policies. At the same time, international competition for investments was getting keener. We knew that we had to continue looking forward and anticipate what the global economy would be like. Singapore suffered its first economic recession post-independence in 1985. The experience made us realize that it was not enough just to develop each person to support the needs of the current economy. We also needed to develop a creative, thinking, and innovative workforce who could adapt quickly to future changes in the economy. To achieve this, we expanded the use of information technology in the schools. We also experimented with a more decentralized model of managing our education system. Our early efforts were designed to have mass education for all, with the greatest levels of efficiency. At this point of our development, however, we needed a more flexible and autonomous school system so that the schools could innovate and become better at developing creativity, individual talent, and promoting a spirit of inquiry. As Prime Minister, I introduced the Ministry of Education's new vision called Thinking Schools, Learning Nation in 1997. We saw three trends about the future. First, the world would become more globalized. Second, knowledge and innovation would be absolutely critical. Third, the defining feature of the future would be one of constant and rapid change. With these expected trends, the old approach of rote learning and repetitive tests was outdated and inadequate. The education system had to shift from this to more engaged learning, discovery through experiences, and the learning of lifelong skills. Today, Thinking Schools, Learning Nation is still the vision for the Ministry of Education. It reflects a continual journey from our education institutes, for our education institutes to constantly evolve to meet the needs of our young, and for education to be a whole of society endeavor. It's not just for the education ministry, the whole society must be behind the move to educate your people. The shift towards lifelong learning is most important. The old mental model of completing one's education before moving on to work in one or two more companies for life is no longer relevant. Life expectancy is going up, and we are all living and working longer. The iron rice bowl concept of lifetime employment, where someone can stay in the job or in the same company for their whole life, is no longer applicable. Instead, we need to equip our people with lifelong employability. Lifelong employability. This is particularly salient to Singapore. We are a small and open economy, our land is limited, and our workforce small. We do not want to depend on cheap labor to attract foreign investments. We want to give our people a better quality of life. Our industrialization process means constant upgrading as uncompetitive older industries give way to new ones, demanding higher skills and knowledge. Those who are retrenched have to be retrained. So we set up a skills development fund in 1979 to provide funding for companies, to train employees, and for the retraining of retrenched workers. Our efforts towards lifelong learning have intensified. In 2003, we launched the Workforce Development Agency, an organization whose role is to ensure that employees remain competitive and relevant to the workforce. By going through courses and on-the-job training. Since then, technology has progressed at an even faster pace, and certain occupations are becoming obsolete and replaced by new ones. So last year, we initiated Skills Future, a nationwide movement to create opportunities for Singaporeans to develop skills and advance based on the attainment and mastery of skills. A key object for Skills Future is to allow our people to develop to their fullest potential, regardless of their starting points. Education reform is not an easy task. It is like changing the tires of a moving vehicle. No matter how slowly the vehicle moves, it requires much forward planning and skills. Any changes will have to be carefully thought through. They must take into account the road ahead, those who are currently in the vehicle and those who embark later. The shifts I've discussed were based on Singapore's context and development and may not apply to all countries. But I believe that there are some core principles that everyone can use. First, education must be seen as the key to a person's future, an opportunity for a better life. I believe that it is important for every child to be given this opportunity. One's background and natural abilities will, of course, affect how far you can go in life, but education must be provided to all those who want it. In Singapore, the resources we spend on the education for those who are less academically able are as much, if not more, than the resources we spend on those who are better at their studies. With a set of specialized schools for those who are unable to progress through the mainstream education system so that they can get training in vocational skills, which will then give them a pathway towards their future careers. We also have special schools for those with special needs, like those with autism or Down syndrome. While we know that economically, these special needs children may not be able to contribute as much as others, we want to give them an opportunity to at least care for themselves and find meaning in self-development and learning in their own ways. In more recent years, we have also started looking at the multiple definitions of success, beyond just good academic grades and a lucrative career. This is an important point because most of us tend to define success as to how much you earn, what position you hold in an organization, and how good your marks are in school and in university. So we have established specialized independent schools, such as the Singapore Sports School and the School of the Arts, where youths who have an interest and talent in areas such as sports or the arts can have an opportunity to develop these talents while still being grounded in a standard academic curriculum. Because of our earlier emphasis on efficiency and grades, we have come to see an increasingly competitive education sphere. Parents are finding ways to give their children an advantage over their peers, whether it is through tuition or enrichment classes. I believe this is similar to the situation in Korea. So some people label this as parentocracy. Parentocracy, where financially better off parents endow their children with the privileges of private tuition and extra enrichment programs. Parentocracy is to be expected, and it is good that parents take an active interest in the development of their children. But we do not want those who are disadvantaged financially, whose family background is different, to fall further behind because their families lack resources. We also want to avoid the stress that is unnecessarily imposed on students who go for all these extra classes, or the development of a crutch tuition mentality for the students. Second core principle, the education system has to constantly look ahead. It takes a long time to grow a child. The Chinese have a saying, 10 years to grow a tree, 100 years to grow a man. A present-centric education system will miss the mark, as it will not serve the needs of the child when he grows up. The world is changing more quickly than it ever has before. New technologies are mushrooming even as we speak. Hence, it is no longer enough to just teach knowledge. Many textbooks may be out of date by the time they are published. It is more critical that life skills and character are inculcated in our young. Our wish is for our young people to remain driven and motivated, to seek mastery in all that they do, so that they can learn new skills through their careers and lives, and remain adaptable and thrive in the rapidly changing world. Third principle, education has to meet the needs of the country. Singapore has always taken a pragmatic approach to education. Education is not just for its own sake, but also to ensure that our people are well prepared to be the workforce of the future. We have resisted increasing our places at university too quickly, as we have seen how graduate unemployment has become a serious problem in many countries. I believe this is a problem which Korea now faces. Instead of having students go to university to do subjects like science, law, and humanities, we have multiple pathways to success. Our vocational training institutes and polytechnics give our young people technical and hands-on skill. In the early days of our industrialization, these institutions taught skills suited for technical labor. Today, they teach a wide range of skills, like culinary skills to our aspiring chefs, web design to internet entrepreneurs, and aircraft engineering and maintenance for those with a technical bent. Of course, we know that expectations of parents and aspirations of our youth continue to increase, and everyone wants their child to attain the highest possible level of education. Being a predominantly Asian society, good education is still closely linked to prestige. To meet these aspirations, we have created pathways towards obtaining degrees and even higher qualifications for those who are able and want to become true experts in their craft. So recently, we set up the Singapore Institute of Technology, a university that focuses primarily on giving polytechnic diploma holders degree, upgrading the opportunities in their fields of study, and of course, acquiring a degree after that. Another example, a nurse who has graduated with a top grade from our Institute of Technical Education can go on to get a diploma in the polytechnic, followed by the degree at our university. The knowledge and skills learned at these different levels will enable the nurse to become more qualified and able to do research or teach and supervise future nursing students. Even more importantly, we are working to reshape cultural norms, to recognize that academic qualifications and university degrees in particular are not the only way to success, nor the ultimate goal in themselves. Degrees must be more than paper qualifications. They must represent skills and knowledge that can be put to good use. If there are other ways to get those skills and knowledge needed to do a job well and to advance in one's career, this is something to be encouraged. Among other things, Skills Future is about a multitude of opportunities in education, training, and in the workforce centered on skills and knowledge, so that Singapore can progress towards an advanced economy and an inclusive society. Finally, a country which wants to succeed must always give priority to education resourcing. You can utilize your resources efficiently so that there's little wastage, but you cannot skimp on adequate funding for good teachers and good infrastructure. In Singapore, we have invested heavily in our teaching service. Teachers are paid a competitive salary, and there are established career tracks for teachers to become education leaders or specialists in their field of study. We have a National Institute of Education that provides rigorous training for our teaching trainees. In terms of infrastructure, we have built up a wide range of facilities for our education needs. The investment is not limited to the top schools or the universities. If you look at our polytechnics or Institute of Technical Education or vocational institutes, you will be amazed at how well-resourced they are. The principles I have laid out have guided our development of the education sector over the past 50 years to support the needs of our changing society and economy. They are even more relevant today, regardless of country and its level of development. Today's young generation will enter the working world under vastly different conditions from their parents and grandparents who saw rapid economic growth and rising standards of living. They will grapple with serious economic difficulties and may not see vast improvements in standard of living during their working lives. We see trends of high unemployment and underemployment amongst youths, even those with degrees in many developed countries. For some, the technologies of tomorrow will be exciting new frontiers. For many others, they'll present a scary world where jobs are replaced by robots. If the education system does not prepare our youth for a future where the only constant is change, we will be at risk of losing a generation of politically and economically disenfranchised youths. I know that education is not the only solution to tomorrow's challenges, but it is an important requirement. I hope that my speech will trigger some ideas on how we can best direct our efforts in education towards a brighter future. I now look forward to hearing your thoughts, your questions in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Prime Minister Ko's speech was very warm and informative. So there's the old saying in Korea, it's a leader should have 4 elements. The one is health and outlook. Second one, speech. Third one, the writing. and finally, judgment. So 한국말로 말하면 네 가지를 갖춰야 된다는 신원섭한 이런 말이 있죠. Four elements. I think Prime Minister Kohl has such a talent. You are really qualified for meeting four elements, right? Do you agree? Yeah. Okay. So I prepared four questions. First one might be some hypothetical questions. Singapore has carried out the prosperity and it carried out successful higher education system, right, for economic prosperity. I think such a success has been made under stable and constant political condition, cautiously saying, in other words, under single-party ruling system. So my question is like this. What if Singapore would have competitive multi-party system with a periodical change in political power structure? As we know, as the Korea has had a different political environment from that in Singapore, right? Do you think it possible for Korea to implement such a consistent and solid education policy for several decades?
Answer is no. Because the whole idea of a contestable, pluralistic party system where governments change after every election is to change policies of the previous government. Very seldom would one party contest on the basis that they can do the same job better than you. If you have such a party system where two parties contest on who have the better man, better talent to advance the core values, the core interests of society with the same program, then it is all right, because it's a matter of competition as to who can do it better. But that's not the nature of politics. You have left, you have center, you have right, in terms of the thinking of your political contest. So when one party wins, it's going to change some policies. But education is a very difficult area to change because you will not know the result until years later on, 10 years later on, and you can see the effect of the change. So halfway through, the good impact of a change may not be seen. So the other party will then contest that, you have made a mistake and so on, and they will try and change back. So my frank answer is, no, you can't have an education system that evolves at a time to meet the needs of society, which requires long-term planning. But I want to correct a misperception on the part of many people. Singapore has a multi-party system. It is not right to say we are a one-party system. In the last election, we had at least 5 or 6 parties contesting against us, with one opposition party that is fairly significant and sizable. The rest, of course, are very small parties who will not make an impact. But what we have succeeded in doing is to win elections after elections. And we could do that because in our early years, we had a very good visionary government. The leadership was provided by Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. So when he succeeded in delivering a better system, housing, education, health to the people, he was re-elected again and again. So this is the advantage of Singapore, the ability to plan long term. And yet, we have to fight every election, every 5 years or so.
So you have pointed out the trend, with the high unemployment and underemployment amongst youths, even in developed countries, right? We agree that a trend of polarization under such employment situation. We worry about such a trend will result in inequalities and increasing employment vacuum between demand and supply of a future job market, right? You have already pointed out. My question is that, how do you suggest to deal with such a serious employment situation to be realized? From the point of government, from the point of market, and higher education. Additionally, how do we reach the social consensus for reaching such a new goal, especially for satisfying minimum requirement of human needs, the basic questions, the fundamental questions, right?
It's easy to explain, but it's not easy to implement. Basically, you should anticipate the changes in the world. What are the likely trends? What are the new industries to be expected? And then you've got to be able to grow the economy. And of course, the economy grows, which you could grow in Singapore in early years by more than 10%, and later on maybe 7 to 10%. In Korea, likewise, in the early years, you could grow very quickly. So when the economy grew very quickly, you could absorb the youth coming out from the schools into your workforce. But for the future, it's a problem which Korea is facing, it's a problem which Singapore will face. Because for the future, in the case of Singapore, we are now expecting what they call new normal. And the new normal for economic growth in Singapore is 2 to 3%. 5-6 years ago, we were growing by 7-8%. So if you're growing at 2 to 3%, and at the same time, you are growing your university places, then you're going to have a mismatch down the road. If what you produce from your education system, the students do not have the skills for the future, then you've got a problem. So my emphasis was, in our case, education is lifelong. So after schools, you must provide them with the opportunities through funding, through courses available, and encourage a culture of lifelong learning. So if you have lifelong learning, there's a possibility that you minimize the wastage of human resources through inadequate jobs or through jobs which do not quite meet their potential and their talent. So you can prescribe this in terms of a hypothesis or in terms of a philosophy, but to implement it, to guess right what are the skills of the future, it's not always possible. Just to give you one example, many years ago, we realized that genome, DNA study would come in place. So we thought, yes, pharmaceutical research, biology will become very important. So we started teaching in primary school terms like DNA, genome, so that people get used to the vocabulary of those potentially future required skills.
So the third question, if we assume the future society will be more innovative, competitive, more global with fast technology advance, right? How do you imagine, not think, imagine new dimension of value system for whole society, including higher education? So can you suggest new vision which can partially substitute existing economic value, economic growth, economic prosperity. 4, if we have any, can you tell us importance of non-monetary value, which might be social harmony, social coexistence, and reciprocal trust, regional solidarity, and other spiritual sphere from the professor of social science. My personal question.
Well, I think Singapore provides a good example of study for other countries. Korea is a much bigger country. Korea has a bigger population who do not travel so extensively. In Singapore, it's a very small country, small economy. So by compulsion, Singapore has been open as an economy. So Singaporeans are very globalized, very international, and they study overseas, they work overseas. So what is the problem and how do we fix it? It's not easy, but we've got to start by teaching Singaporeans the core values, identity, a sense of rootedness to your country. So when jobs are not so much available in Singapore, and good jobs are available in banking, financial industry, tourism, in other countries, Singaporeans have the whole world as an employment market for them. And indeed, you do have many Singaporeans working in China, working in the US, in high-end services sector. But because you have taught them the values, they remain at heart a Singaporean. And of course, we hope they will bring up their children in the Singapore way, and they themselves will come back to Singapore. So that's, I think, basic, because without that ability to give them that rootedness, then we'll lose them. So can you imagine? Well, in our case, I think we imagine the world in future to be much more interconnected, where people can move around very easily. I think that applies somewhat to Korea too, but very much so in Singapore. So when they move all over the world, well, hopefully if they have sound values, wherever they are, with their character and values, they can contribute to a better society wherever they live. And not just to go to a place to exploit opportunities there and not give back. So the value is you've got to give back to your own community, so wherever you are, well, you contribute to that. And of course, if those values are in you, then those who move up to the leadership position, they can talk about regional organization, social harmony across countries and so on.
Mr. Prime Minister, you are familiar with so-called 4 dragons, right? Including Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Korea, right? They are often quoted as model countries of economic success, right? 4 countries have had the tradition of Confucianism in common, right? So let me try to figure it out, Asian value, so-called. Right? Well, how do you characterize the advantage of Asian value, which is connected to the Confucianism, which is regarded as one of the propelling forces for economic success? On the other hand, how do you explain to overcome possible disadvantages of Asian value to meet the rapidly changing society and global competition?
Well, I think Asian values, this issue was heavily debated many years ago. And by Asian values here, for discussion purposes, there will be emphasis on families, emphasis on education. So in Asia, we place tremendous value on education. An educated person, a teacher, is very highly respected. But you also put your fingers on the problem. We do have weaknesses in our system with such values. We are taught filial piety. Respect your teachers, respect your parents, don't ask questions. And for the new world, if you don't ask questions, you are not going to be able to adapt to changes. I don't know about Korea, but I know in Singapore, well, we are taught not to ask questions. It's very different in the West. You have to ask questions. I've been to the US, I've seen visited a school, when the teacher asked a question, before the question was finished, the whole class put up their hands. Because everybody is eager to answer. Right or wrong is not important. It is your thought processes, your preparedness to express yourself and defend your view. So in the US, you have this very strong spirit of inquiry. That's where a lot of inventions, innovations, that's where the Silicon Valley, the IT, the Googles took place. So in Asia, we are several steps behind because we don't inquire. What we do is, whatever you tell me, I give it back to you. If I give back to you what you tell me, I get 100 marks. So there's a strength, which is an emphasis on education. The weakness is a wrong emphasis if you just talk about learning and not asking questions. So we've got to balance this, strengths and weaknesses and understand what the world is about. The world is about a changing world. So skills, inquiry is very important. So in Singapore, we're encouraging this, getting our students to ask more questions and then do research. And now you have information, knowledge available in your smart devices. You don't have to store everything here. You don't have to learn by heart. It's all there. Whatever you want, just go and do some research on your own. It's all there. Knowledge is there. Inquiry, insightful analysis, judgment, not there. So it's a different world. I think a different population, different young people. What the generation will be, I do not know. I mean, I like to quip. We may be bringing up a new generation who think with their fingers. We don't have smartphone, we think with our head. They are glued to their smart devices every second of the day. So their thinking is all done through the fingers. So what would that generation be? I do not know. That generation can multitask very well. We can do many things at one time. Well, my generation, maybe one or two things, at one time, we focus. They multitask, they don't focus on one particular job. So what would it be? It's a bit difficult for me to imagine, because I belong to a much older generation.
The final question, the Singapore and Korea are having a common interest in many areas, especially in economic sector and political sector too. Can you tell us specific the areas or as the concept to be intensified between two countries? Which area or as to which part?
The easy one, of course, is the economic part. That's straightforward. There's trade, there's investment, we encourage it. The bigger area where we can work on is to bring about a vision of a prosperous, peaceful Asian community. In Southeast Asia, we have ASEAN, out of 10 countries that work as a regional forum on many areas. In Northeast Asia, now, the three countries, South Korea, North Korea, and China, are getting together to work out some kind of free trade arrangements and through summit meetings. So if Korea, being, if you don't mind my saying, the smallest of the three countries in terms of economy and population, Singapore, in the ASEAN context, one of the smaller ones, if we can try, and link up our desire, our vision, our ability and skills, these two different areas, and through trade, investment, cultural exchanges, people exchanges, education, and so on, then we can help to create a larger, prosperous East Asian community. So that's the kind of cooperation I would like to see between two small countries. Of course, to Singapore, you are very big, but in the context of Northeast Asia, I think you are a little small. So if we can think out some scheme where we can work together to advance the larger interests of others, our interests would also be advanced when the whole region becomes more prosperous.
Well, we are greatly appreciating as Mr. Prime Minister's hardworking and serious message for this morning. Why don't you welcome his hardworking speech? Why don't you applaud his speech?
Thank you. Thank you.
네, 변화하는 사회, 또 변화하는 교육에 대해서 함께 고민해보는 아주 뜻깊은 시간이었습니다. 기조 연설을 위해서 방안을 해주셨는데요. 고촉통 총리님 그리고 대담자로 수고해주신 오연천 총장님 다시 한번 감사의 인사를 드리겠습니다. 자, 계속해서 제프리 페퍼 미국 스탠퍼드대 석좌 교수님을 모시고 리더십의 위기 어떻게 극복할 것인가라는 주제로 두 번째 기조 연설을 청해 듣도록 하겠습니다. 제프리 페퍼 교수님을 단상 위로 모시겠습니다. 여러분 박수로 환영해 주시기 바랍니다. May I welcome you to the podium?
All right, so I am going to speak to you briefly about the leadership crisis and how to fix it and how maybe we should change the way in which we do leadership development, and how maybe the way we should do our leadership training, and how maybe we should change many, many things, because the leadership industry, a large industry, a successful industry, has completely failed. Which is a strong book, strong statement. Leadership BS, I understand not everyone is familiar with the American colloquialism. And if you search on Google, leadership BS, you learn about Bachelor of Science degrees in leadership. But of course, leadership BS stands for bullshit. And the subtitle of the book is Fixing Workplaces and Careers, One Truth at a Time. The book has been out for about a month. It has been reviewed in the Financial Times. It has been reviewed in the Wall Street Journal. It has been reviewed very nicely in The Economist magazine. It is one of the top 15 books for the McKinsey Financial Times Book of the Year Award, which I must say surprised me. We begin with two facts. First fact, the leadership industry, as represented in conferences such as this, is enormous. If you go to scholar.google.com, Google search of the scholarly literature, 2.6 million entries. If you do a search just on Google under the term leadership, 148 million entries. Amazon.com, 117,000 entries. Estimates are that somewhere between 14 and 50 billion US dollars are spent annually on leadership and leadership development just in the United States. Virtually every business school and many other universities have developing or educating leaders as part of their core mission. So Harvard Business School says, our objective is to educate leaders who make a difference in the world. Leadership is everywhere. But notwithstanding the fact that leadership is enormous, and we spend a fortune, and we write books, and we have TED Talks, And we have all of this stuff. The state of leadership in workplaces in the world is by every single measure horrible. Gallup, in their study of 142 countries of employee engagement, found only 13% of people were engaged, 24% actively disengaged. Gallup defines active disengagement as sabotaging your workplace. Twice the percentage sabotaging is being engaged. Maybe you don't like Gallup's data. Pick your favorite HR consulting firm. Their studies of workplace engagement around the world, Towers, Aon Hewitt, the same data. Employees are unengaged. Steadily declining levels of job satisfaction. In the US, in Canada, the Mercer study worldwide. No wonder that in a Parade magazine survey in the year 2012, 35% of US employees said, "I would forego willingly a substantial raise if I could fire my boss." Leaders are losing their jobs. The Conference Board in 2012 has documented a persistent decline in CEO tenure since 2000. The consulting firm Booz, published in the journal Strategy and Business for years, has documented the decline in CEO tenure. In 2011, 14% of the CEOs of the largest 2,500 companies in the world were replaced, with turnover being highest in the largest companies. It is not just senior executives. Graduates, even of Stanford University's illustrious and hard to get into graduate school of business, will at an unfortunately high rate get fired, not lose voluntarily, get fired within the first year to two after graduating, because we have done a terrible job of preparing them for the organizational realities that they are going to confront. Workplaces are bad, leaders are losing their jobs, and thirdly, leadership development is failing as an activity. Only 7% of senior managers polled by a United Kingdom business school thought their firms effectively developed global leaders. An Accenture survey found that only 8% of executives felt their companies were successful in leadership development, which means 92% of the companies were failing in this critical task. A survey of almost 1,400 executives by the Institute for Corporate Productivity reported that even among the best, highest performing companies, 66% of the companies reported they were ineffective at developing leaders, and they were getting worse at the task. My favorite data, I have lots, and this is only a partial set of the data I present in the introduction chapter to Leadership BS. William Gentry, a famous researcher from the Center for Creative Leadership, which runs leadership development activities all over the world, summarizing the results of numerous studies, concluded 50% of all managers are ineffective in their current role. Leadership has failed. Leaders are failing. A 2012 survey by Harvard's Kennedy School reported that 69% of Americans believed there was a leadership crisis. If you look at the Edelman Trust Index, run all over the world, you will see trust in leaders is low and for the most part has declined over the years. Ronald Clement tracking the Fortune 100 from 1999, found that by 2005, prior to the financial crisis, some 40% of these companies had engaged in misconduct serious enough to draw national media attention. The leadership industry has failed to develop leaders. Leaders are losing their jobs. Workplaces are horrible. Leaders are screwing up in a major way. You just need to pick up the daily paper to see who is it going to be. Is it going to be Volkswagen with its cars designed to fool environmental regulations? Is it going to be Takata with exploding airbags, the extent of which is still being investigated? Is it going to be Goldman Sachs or some financial institution doing something amazing? Development Dimensions International survey of 1,300 people around the world found that 1/3 did not consider their own manager to be effective, and their global leadership forecast noted that by their own admission, leaders are falling short, with leaders consistently giving low marks to the quality of leadership in their own organization. So whatever else our 20 or 40 or $50 billion a year and the thousands of TED Talks and the thousands of leadership conferences and forums and meetings are doing, producing better leaders is manifestly not one of them. We have failed. That's the bad news. The good news is we can stop failing. But in order to do so, we are going to have to do some things that I suspect most people in this room don't want to do. But that's okay. What are the causes of all of this leadership failure? Number one, would you like to be a leadership expert? Come on up, you are. This is the only professional field in which, to the best of my ability, there are no requirements of any kind in order to be considered a leadership expert. No relevant expertise, no relevant knowledge, no contribution to the social science literature. Anybody, if you're attractive enough, articulate enough, and have an interesting enough story, can be a leadership expert, and many of you are. When I did a survey, Casual Study Inc. magazine in 2014 listed, in quotes, the top leadership experts. So I said, I'm going to look at the top 20 of these people. Only 4 of them had a PhD in a relevant field. 1 had no degree at all. 2 had degrees in divinity, which is interesting and appropriate because leadership development and leadership training has become mostly about lay preaching, not about telling people anything factual. 5 did not have degrees in business. And by the way, when you went to the experts' websites and said, what are you good at? The answer is talking. Talking. In 2014, I had my back operated on by a very fine neurosurgeon. Let me assure you that he has a degree in a relevant field, and his expertise is not talking. It is doing surgery. Only in the leadership field would we hire, promote, advance, and listen to people who, for the most part, have no vetting on whether or not they know what they are talking about. And in fact, the less they know what they're talking about, the better, the greater their success. And then when we send them to the leadership development activities, we measure the success of the leadership development activities not by have we improved engagement, have we improved job satisfaction, have we improved the tenure of leaders, have we improved something that I've talked about that might measure leadership effectiveness. Instead, we measure whether or not the market, broadly defined, has had a good time and liked them. Happy sheets, smiley face forms, which McKinsey Incorporated has said is one of the major problems in leadership development. In other words, we are rewarding entertainment. I had a good time. The donuts were great. They made me laugh. If you reward entertainment, you get entertainment. Few companies, I know almost none, Google being an exception, assess leadership interventions using behaviorally and performance-relevant criteria. Not, did you have a great time, but did we improve our processes on things that we care about? Diversity, engagement, whatever that might be. And then we fail to acknowledge the incredible divergence in interests between leaders and those led. Leaders are interested, frankly, in salary, in job tenure, and in power. Organizations are interested in profitability, employee engagement, productivity, revenue, profit growth. These measures are not perfectly correlated within category and almost certainly uncorrelated across them. People say to me, what should I do to be a better leader? To which my response is, how do you define a better leader? Carly Fiorina is running for president of the United States as we speak. She left Hewlett-Packard with a $41 million severance. She also, during her tenure at Hewlett-Packard, laid off tens of thousands of employees and took the stock price down by 50%. Was she a good leader? I'll let you decide. First of all, she walked away with $41 million. That's pretty good. Secondly, she's got enough of a political skill to run for president. We need to be much more precise and thoughtful as we think about the criteria by which we make statements of who is a good leader and who is not. Because the interests of organizations and leaders do not coincide. When Stanley O'Neill took Merrill Lynch into oblivion during the financial crisis, Stanley O'Neill left with a severance pay package of $140 million, and by the way, was after the Merrill Lynch debacle put on the board of directors of Alcoa. Was Stanley O'Neill a success? If you're Mr. and Mrs. O'Neill, he did great. If you are an employee of Merrill Lynch, possibly a different answer. We also suffer from profound conceptual imprecision about leadership concepts and ideas, not just an academic issue. One of my favorites, authentic leadership. Go to the Google search under the term authentic leadership. It means everything and anything. You cannot measure, you cannot improve, you cannot do anything to make a construct better or validate it or study it, given the imprecision in definition and operationalization that much of leadership is plagued by. There are obviously some remedies. Measure outcomes. Satisfaction, engagement, workplace bullying, turnover, number of successors, various measures of leadership effectiveness that matter. Get away from assessing your leadership development efforts by whether or not people had a good time. It's an odd thing. When I had back surgery, my back surgeon did not send me a questionnaire, did you enjoy having your spine cut open? We need to have relevant measures or else we are doomed. Secondly, select scientists, not entertainers, to do the scientific work of leadership evaluation and development. Third, acknowledge the conflicts of objectives and then work to understand where they come from and how they might be reduced. Many people say it's terrible that we have all these narcissists running companies. We select for narcissists. We select for people who are overly self-confident. We select for people who put their own interests first. And then we say, why do we have so many leaders who put their own interests among that of the organization? We have selected in the wrong way. And next, there's another leadership problem. We have leadership as inspiration. Wow. When I was giving a talk on this material at the Valeric Business School in Belgium, I decided I needed to spell Valeric correctly, so I went to their website, and on the front page of their website is looking for an inspiring management course. What an interesting word, inspiring. The Australian Graduate School of Management's website notes that the school creates inspirational learning opportunities. If you go to law, medicine, engineering, education, as I have done, you see websites that describe schools that are professionally relevant, material that is well delivered, data that is scientifically based, but only management that believes that we are in the inspiration business. No wonder we have so many people with degrees in divinity doing leadership development. Inspiration is a very, very, very poor way on which to found a leadership development effort, because we know that inspiration lasts for a short period of time and then disappears. If you want to engage in some fundamental behavioral change, stop smoking, stop eating, stop drinking. We understand how to accomplish behavioral change, and it has nothing to do with inspiration. Leadership writing and speaking as a form of lay preaching is designed to provide reassurance and good feelings. Everything is fine. The search for inspiration drives the use of rare, unusual examples, which of course is no way on which to build a science. And then we have all the stories we tell, stories which are mostly not true because they can't be. I saw his picture up earlier before, Jack Welch, great guy. The truth about Jack Welch's management, there's not much correspondence between what Jack will tell you about how he managed. First of all, everybody engages in self-enhancement and presents themselves in the most favorable light. But secondly, as we know from decades of research on eyewitness accounts of crimes and eyewitness accounts of accidents, even if you try to tell the truth and are motivated to do so, recall is imperfect. So I do not go listen to the CEOs who come to talk at Stanford Business School. They tell you nice stories, but the nice stories' truth value is oftentimes quite small. By the way, self-deception has been found by psychologists and anthropologists to be an adaptive trait because it makes lying more successful. And after you tell a story often enough, it becomes impossible for you to distinguish truth from reality. So when you hear the leadership stories, don't believe them. Inspiration is a poor way for accomplishing change. Inspiration sets unrealistic expectations for ourselves. It raises motivation, but only for a short time. Many of the inspiring stories we hear are not true, which of course leads to cynicism, which is widely around in the world. We know how to accomplish change: measurement, priming, and reminders. So my recommendations: number one, do due diligence on leaders to ensure that the stories are true. So when someone stands up and says, I led the most successful organization, my employees love me, Go to a website like Glassdoor. When somebody stands up, as a friend of mine did at Stanford, and says, I have a great relationship with my partners, go to the city where he lives. Public records are available, and ask how many lawsuits have his partners filed against him. Do due diligence. If I stood here today and said to you, I have invented the cure for cancer and will sell it to you for $500 million, which, by the way, had I invented the cure for cancer, would be the cheapest price ever, I doubt many people in this audience are going to write me a check for $500 million without first figuring out whether or not there's any substance. But we hear the stories of leaders, and the more fabulous the story, and the more inspiring the story, and therefore the more unlikely the story is to be true, the more we believe it. Just as you do due diligence when you make your financial investments, do due diligence on the leaders whose stories you hear. Stop chasing inspiration. What you need are facts, not fables, and understand the pitfalls of trying to learn from rare events and extreme examples. It is possible to build a science of human behavior. It is possible to build a science of leadership. It is certainly possible to create in this world a set of workplaces with higher levels of engagement, with higher levels of employee satisfaction, and with many fewer leaders failing. But the only way we are going to do that, the only possible way, is to pay attention to the facts, to pay attention to the evidence, and to stop engaging in the amount of self-deception and stories that we tell ourselves and that we tell other people. Thank you very much.
네, 다시 한번 뜨거운 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.